Hey folks, and welcome to another Passion for Sound audio review. Today we're taking a look at the Kef Mu7. These are a portable closed-back wireless headphone from Kef, normally known as makers of speakers, not portable audio devices. But given their heritage, I was really excited when the local distributor offered to send me a pair of the Mu7s to check out, and particularly when I realised that they retail for about the same price as the recently reviewed Sony XM5s. That's the WH-1000XM5, but that's just a mouthful, so I'm going to call them the XM5s. The Mu7s come in at $400 specifically, and that makes them a fairly pricey closed-back wireless headphone, but by no means the most expensive at all. Knowing their heritage coming from Kef, I was really excited to try them, and so come with me now as we find out if these are more style than substance, or if they actually sound great too. I just mentioned that these could be more style than substance, and the reason I said that was because I think they're one of the best looking wireless headphones on the market. They do come in different colours. I've got the silver one here as you can see, and they're just a lovely headphone to both hold and look at, but also to wear. I was slightly disappointed when I took them out of the box because this cup on the back here is actually just plastic. It's a glossy painted or glossy coloured plastic, and so it doesn't feel quite as good as it looks initially, but it does still feel pretty quality for a plastic finish. I probably slightly prefer the soft touch plastic on the Sonys, but they don't look as good as the Kef Mu7s. Beyond the plastic cups though, we've got these great metal headbands here. These feel incredibly solid and sturdy. They're also nicely finished, they're rounded off really nicely. There's no sharp or rough edges to touch anywhere. And then they mold seamlessly up into this silicone headband, which is wonderfully comfortable. You've got a nice amount of padding. There's not too much padding to make them bulky, but there is enough that I've never been uncomfortable wearing these. Coming back down to the pads, we've got these really nice kind of plush pads here. They're either a leather or a protein leather, and they're just a really nice, comfortable pad. The clamp from these is a little bit heavier than from the Sony, so you do feel them kind of squishing your head a bit, but I haven't found them uncomfortable with extended use. In some ways it's better because it makes them feel a bit more secure on the head. In some ways it's worse because you are aware that there is a bit of clamp force going on, whereas the Sonys don't do that. So it's going to be partly personal preference, and I haven't tried because I find them comfortable. I haven't tried stretching it out, maybe sitting them over a box or something to help stretch the headband, but there's probably a good chance that you can actually reduce the clamping force by putting them over something wide and leaving them there for a couple of days. While we're talking about physical design, let's talk about a few of the buttons, and I will come back around in a second to specifications and features. But when we're talking about the physical design, let's just quickly talk about what's on each ear cup. In the case of the left ear cup, there's nothing on it, it's just a plain ear cup. In the case of the right ear cup, we've got a USB-C connection for charging. We've got an ANC on and off button. That will switch through 3 modes. So there's the regular ANC, there's smart ANC, and there's ANC off. There's not a proper transparency mode on these as far as I can find. I've tried different combinations of pressing the button, and as far as I can tell, the nearest thing to transparency is just switching ANC off. So they still isolate pretty well at that stage. It's not a full transparency mode, and if that's something important to you, these might not be the best choice. Moving on from the ANC button, we've got the power on off button. That's also for pairing, you hold that down. There's a 3.5mm input, so these come with a cable. You can use them as wired headphones if you like, and I'll talk about that soon. And then finally, we've got a multifunction button here. This will activate things like the Google Assistant, Siri, Alexa, etc. Now, I think I just said that the power button's for pairing. I could be wrong on that one. It might actually be this button for pairing as well. So check the manual if you're going to buy these as to how to pair it. But while we're on the topic of pairing, it's worth mentioning that when you first get these, they're going to trigger pairing mode automatically. So it's just going to be available to connect with your phone, whatever device you're using. But the other thing I wanted to talk about is just how quickly these connect with my device when I switch them on. When I switch on the Sony XM5s, it can take a good probably 15-20 seconds. It feels like longer when you're waiting for it to connect to a device that you've already paired with. It takes an age, it seems, for the XM5s. Whereas for some reason with the Kefs, they are absolutely snappy. So within just moments of switching them on, my phone's found them and I'm ready to listen to music, watch a movie, whatever it might be. Now that we've moved into talking about connecting to different devices, it's probably worth mentioning that the codecs available with the MU7 include all the norms. They do go as far as having things like aptX HD, aptX Adaptive, but they don't have LDAC. And I do think that's a little bit of a shame. I generally find LDAC to sound just that little bit better than aptX HD. It comes across as having just a bit better resolution overall. But having said that, as I'll talk about in a moment, it doesn't seem to hold back the MU7s from being a very enjoyable headphone. aptX HD is definitely a good codec. It's a big upgrade from SBC and AAC, but I generally find that using something like LDAC on the Sonys is a bigger step up again. So it would have been nice to hear what these were capable of had they had LDAC, but as I already said, and as I'll go into in more detail in a moment, there's nothing wrong at all with the sound from the MU7s. And so let's move into sound quality in just a second, but before we do get there, the final things I should mention, and you probably already gathered this, is they come with this nice zip-up fabric case. It's a semi-hard case, as most portable headphones come with these days. And as you can also see here, the headphone cups do swivel. They only swivel in the one direction, but in my opinion it's the right direction because it means you can take them off, turn them flat, and sit them on the desk or put them inside the carry case. And that makes the carry case pretty compact, as you can see here, if you are putting it in a bag. And so with all that said, they're a great design headphone. They look great, they feel great, they're comfortable, they pair really effectively and connect really fast. And so the biggest question then comes down to how they sound and whether or not the heritage coming from a speaker manufacturer like Kef has actually made a difference. As I go to start talking about sound quality, I realised that there was one key thing that I forgot to mention, and that is that on the right ear cup of these, you've also got touch controls. This is something I should have touched on, so it's really important that I cover this. I don't always enjoy touch controls on headphones because it can be a bit fiddly working out which zones do what sometimes. And what they've done really nicely with Kef is this little bowl in here allows you to kind of identify really easily where the touch zones are. And so it's fairly normal controls. You swipe up or down for volume, left or right's going to change tracks, and tapping it is going to pause or play the music. And so I just wanted to quickly touch on that. It's not really any different to the Sonys in terms of that functionality, but what it does do is it gives you that little zone where you can quickly and easily feel where your hand is on the cup, and I do enjoy that. Trying to work out what gear you should buy next? Have a look at the Passion for Sound Recommends link down in the description below. Clicking on the link will take you through to my Patreon page, and specifically a post where you can click on the Airtable image to go through to my recommended product database. Once you're in the database, you can use the filter button up the top to choose which sorts of product types you want to have a look at, maybe headphones, maybe DACs, maybe amps. Choose the one or ones that you want to see from this list, and then you can also sort the list by price if you want to, or other features as well. You'll then see a consolidated list just of the product types you want to have a look at, including things like what the retail price was when I last checked. You've got links to my reviews of each product, and then also links to where you can go and buy them. Feel free to play around with the filters and sorting options as much as you like to find the gear you're looking for, and I hope that this database points you in just the right direction for you. So happy hunting, happy listening, and now let's get back to the review. And so now with that covered off, let's get back to sound quality, and the first thing I want to say is these sound great. They've got a punchy sound, but it's still a fairly polite sound, I would say. They're not the most dynamic sounding headphone around, but they're also not as overly polite as the Sonys are straight out of the box. And I will do a proper comparison with the Sonys, which are over behind me here in case you hadn't realised. I will do a proper comparison with those in just a second, but let's start by talking just about the MU7s on their own. As I said, they've got a fairly punchy sound that does vary depending on the mode, and we'll talk about that in a second. But in general, what I describe them as having is a fairly natural sound. There's a little bit of boxiness because they are a closed back headphone, and that is always difficult to control for. And whilst they've got a good sense of punch and thump in the bass, excellent bass extension, they're what I'd call slightly polite because the treble, whilst fairly extended, is delivered in a pretty refined and pretty polite way. What the Kefs do very well though is produce a lovely sense of mid-range, and so they're an interesting headphone. On first listen, I wasn't convinced that I loved them. Then when I went back and forth with the XM5s, I started to understand what the Kef tuning was, and as I've listened to them more and more, they're just a very enjoyable headphone. They're one of those headphones that when you first put them on, they're not going to wow you. You're not going to put them on and go, wow, the treble's great, or the bass is great. But the benefit of that is that over time, as you listen to them more and more, you start to enjoy the fact that they're doing all frequencies really well, and they're doing it all in a way that's never going to fatigue you. And I think for a portable, closed-back type headphone, that's really important. Whether I've been listening to low-quality recordings of things like audiobooks, or high-res streaming from Cobas and Tidal, whatever I've thrown at these, they've always sounded good. They've got the chops to sound really good with high-res, high-quality content, but they've never punished me for the lower-quality content like audiobooks. They're dynamic enough and balanced enough that they sound great with movies, TV shows, etc. And so for me, they're an excellent all-rounder, but they're not going to blow anyone's mind on first listen, I don't think. One other detail about the sound quality that I should mention is they produce a good sense of soundstage, but it's pretty compact. Again, they're a closed back headphone. And so you're going to get a fairly small size soundstage, but a good sense of separation. You can hear easily where the individual instruments are placed. And so in that sense, they're doing a really good job. I touched on the fact before that the sound can change a little bit depending on the mode. And that is to say that these are an interesting headphone where, generally speaking, they're pretty much identical whether you're using active noise cancelling or not. But when you switch active noise cancelling on, it actually pulls back on a little mid-bass hump that they have. And so if you like a slightly punchier mid-bass and you don't need active noise cancelling, you can switch off the active noise cancelling and they will give you that little bit of extra punch. However, that's not to say that they sound better or worse in either way, it's just different. For music, I probably enjoy them slightly better with the active noise cancelling switched on, but at the same time, I don't feel like I'm being punished when I turn active noise cancelling off and get that little bit of mid-bass back. And so I guess what I mean by that is that regardless of the circumstances you're in, if you're out and about and you need noise cancelling, you can turn it on and know that you're still getting excellent sound, or you can turn it off when you're at home and it's quiet, and then you can still enjoy excellent quality sound, albeit a tiny bit different. It might also be of interest for some of you to know that when you plug these in as a wired source, you can run them switched off and have no interference at all from the active circuitry, but at the same time, if you do want to apply the active circuitry, you can do that too. So you can have them wired and noise cancelling at the same time. While we're talking about active noise cancelling circuits, this is probably a good time now to do the comparison between the XM5s and the Kef Mu7. As I said before, they retail at about the same amount. And the first thing that I wanted to compare was the active noise cancelling, because that's one area that the Sonys are absolutely fantastic. Comparing the two back and forth in the same environment of noise, what I found was I think the Sonys are still just a little bit ahead of the Kefs. The Kefs did a very, very good job at reducing the noise. They particularly did a good job at pulling back on any sort of bass and lower frequency rumbles, so the sort that you're going to get on an aeroplane, for instance. But I feel like the Sonys did just slightly better with some of the higher frequency content. And so both are going to do a perfectly good job. I wouldn't personally make a decision based on noise cancelling here. I think they're both good enough that you should be choosing on other factors such as the features and the sound quality. But if for some reason active noise cancelling is the absolute priority for you, then the Sonys still are the better choice. But let's see where else the Sonys and the Kef Mu7s differ so you can make a better choice if these are the two you're looking at. In terms of features and functions, a couple of things I will mention is that the Sonys do offer you some smart functions, so you can start talking and they'll actually switch themselves off and put you in transparency mode. They've got a true transparency mode. There are also EQ capabilities, and we'll talk about those in a moment. And then there's also some additional features, like there's some 3D spatial sound options available with streaming services like Tidal. So there's more sort of smart features from the Sony, if you like, than there are from the Mu7s. The Mu7s are just going to give you a pure listening experience with wireless and active noise cancelling. The Sonys go a bit further. They give you a few more bells and whistles if they're things that you're after. I personally find both headphones very comfortable, but I think the Kefs get the slight nod in terms of long-term wearing comfort, particularly on top of the head, but at the same time they clamp a bit firmer, and that could be a put off for some people. So there are some pros and cons in comfort in both directions. I think on paper, the feature set is much stronger from the Sonys. But when it comes down to sound, they're quite a different sounding headphone. And keeping in mind there's no EQ on the Mu7s, there is on the Sonys, and we'll talk about EQ in a second. But straight out of the box, if you're not to touch EQ on the Sonys and just compare them in their stock versions, the Sonys also have a fairly punchy sound, but their punch feels like it's deeper. So it depends on whether you like that sub-bass punch or more that mid-bass punch as to which one you're going to enjoy. Having said that, comparatively, the Sonys sound quite muffled when you compare them to the Mu7. I said before the Mu7s are a somewhat polite sound, but they never sound muffled. There's a great sense of clarity through the mid-range, and that's lacking in the Sonys out of the box. Overall, the sound from the Sonys is bassier. It pushes the mid-range and the vocals and the key instruments back a bit further from you, but at the same time, it doesn't separate them as well. So you've got a bit more space between you and the listening experience, but not as much separation of the sounds. And so I think overall, the soundstage quality from the Mu7s is better, but the sense of distance from the performance is probably stronger on the Sonys if you don't want that more intimate feeling. Now, I should make it clear, I've never felt like the Mu7s are congested or in your face or too intimate, but I know that some people prefer to feel like they're sitting a few rows back from the performance, whereas the Mu7s probably have you in the third or fourth row. Across a bunch of different music, I found that the Mu7s were more consistently kind of natural sounding. They're not perfect by any stretch. They have got a tiny bit of boxiness to them, but they're more natural sounding across most things. Sounds like snares and guitars are generally better defined by the Mu7s than they are from the Sonys. It just sounds like it's maybe a better quality driver in there. I'm not entirely sure. Of course, the EQ settings within the Sonys can allow you to improve things somewhat, But even with the EQ settings that I landed on and shared in my XM5 review that I've been thoroughly enjoying, even with those settings, I've been going to the MU7s more for their pure sound quality. To paint a full picture of that though, let's use a specific track, and specifically Cheers to the Fall by Andra Day. Starting off with the MU7s, the sound is clear and punchy from those, and Andra Day's vocals are really clear and well separated from the mix. The XM5 is punchy as well, but as I said before, gives you a sense of more deeper bass. And that could be partly because of my clear bass settings on the EQ in the XM5. But even with a fairly balanced tuning on these, they never sound quite as clear. They always sound a little bit muffled from the XM5 compared to the MU7. There's just a better sense of resolution from the MU7s overall. And that's where I think maybe the quality of the driver, the internal damping of the cups, all of that's probably better on the MU7 based on what I'm hearing, whilst the Sony XM5s might be relying more on EQ and DSP to get the sound just right. I'm not suggesting for a second that the Sonys are bad or that they're poorly made and poorly engineered. That's not where I'm headed there. My point is that there's different ways to do it. And my sense is that the Sonys might be relying more on an electronic solution, whereas I think the MU7s are mostly having a physically well-tuned driver in a well-damped housing first, and then maybe just adding a little bit of DSP at the very end. So as I said, two very respectable approaches. There's nothing wrong with either headphone, but they're presenting things a little bit differently. As I listened to this track across both headphones, the same things I said before rang true on this track as all others, and that is that consistently the MU7s just separate sounds better. And it doesn't come down to the EQ settings you use. I tried flipping through different EQ settings on the Sonys, and they could just never give me the same sense of separation, detail retrieval, the sense of naturalness that I feel like the MU7s delivered. Having said that, I don't think either headphone is completely perfect. The MU7s do sound just ever so slightly boxy, as I've already said before, and so neither of these headphones is going to replace a pair of good quality closed-back headphones with maybe an external dongle device, maybe something like a Hydeas AP80 Pro X or a FiiO BTR7. Neither of these is going to replace the quality that you can get from that sort of a setup, but for pure convenience, both are offering you good sound. I think if you don't want to fiddle around with EQ, or maybe more to the point, if you don't need EQ and you just want a good sounding headphone, the MU7s to me are clearly better. And indeed, with any EQ settings, I could never get the XM5 to sound quite as good as the MU7s. But having said that, if you're someone that needs or values EQ, if you like some of those other features I spoke about before, such as a true transparency mode, that talk to chat function where when you start to speak, it senses your voice, switches off the sound, goes into transparency mode, and allows you to have a conversation, if those sorts of features are important to you, then the Sonys are the clear choice, and you're not getting bad sound from them. So for me, it very much comes down to, in a very simplistic way, the Kef Mu7 is the headphone to go to if you just want an easy, high-quality sounding solution. If you want more versatility, more functions, more features, and you're happy to trade off a little bit of sound quality, then the Sonys are still fantastic. And indeed, with both of them here on my desk, I don't know which one I would choose long term. There are some really nice features from the Sonys that I miss on the MU7s. At the moment though, I tend to be reaching for the MU7s for their pure sound quality. And so I think it's very hard to go wrong with either. I've already just said how I think the decision should be made between sound quality versus features, and so hopefully I've given you enough to make that decision for yourself. If there's anything I've forgotten, if there's any questions you have, of course, as always, put them in the comments down below. I do my best to always respond to comments, but hopefully I've given you some good guidance as to which headphone might be right for you. If you have found the video useful, helpful, or just interesting, I'd love it if you'd hit the like button and consider subscribing and ring the notification bell if you haven't already. But for now, let me leave it to the music, so happy listening, and I'll see you here next time on Passion for Sound.